It happened on a Sunday, the kind of Texas afternoon that feels hollow around the edges. Too quiet, too bright, like the sky is holding its breath before it decides to break. The air hummed faintly with heat, the sound of cicadas swelling against the stillness. From the living room, I could hear the dull whir of the ceiling fan and the slow ticking of the clock that had outlived every argument in this house. That's when she said it. "Dad's moving in." No hesitation, no preamble, no question. Just those 3 words, dropped like a match onto a dry field. I looked up from the newspaper I wasn't really reading. Lindsay stood by the counter, one hand wrapped around her coffee mug, her phone glowing on the granite beside her. She didn't look at me when she said it. She said it to the air, to herself, to anyone but me. I waited for her to correct herself, to realize what she was implying. She didn't. My voice came out thin, cracked from disbelief. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" She turned then, slow, deliberate, like a queen acknowledging a servant. "Dad's moving in here. Just until he gets back on his feet." There it was again. Dad. Not Mark. Not your biological father. Just Dad. For a moment, I couldn't even process the words. I just stared at her, this young woman I'd raised since she was 10, the girl whose braces I'd paid for, whose report cards I'd framed, whose college acceptance letter I'd opened with trembling hands. "Here," I finally said. "In this house." She nodded, casual as a weather report. "It's just temporary. He's had a rough time. Lost his apartment." My fingers tightened around the edge of the paper until it crumpled. I looked toward Emily, my wife, who stood by the sink, drying a plate that had already been clean for 5 minutes. She didn't look at me. Didn't even flinch. Her silence was louder than any answer. "Lindsay," I said, forcing calm, "you can't just decide something like that. This isn't." "It's Mom's house too," she cut in. That one hit like a hammer. I almost laughed. 14 years. 14 years of work, of overtime hours, of cutting corners to pay for new tiles, new appliances, new furniture. 14 years of carrying a mortgage under my name alone because Emily's credit had collapsed after the divorce. 14 years of believing that paper meant something, that a signature could buy belonging. Apparently, it couldn't. Emily still hadn't turned around. She was staring out the window now, watching the sun blister across the lawn. I saw her reflection in the glass, stiff, small, afraid to meet my eyes. "When were you going to tell me?" I asked her. She finally turned, slowly, the towel clenched between her hands. "I was going to talk to you tonight." "About a stranger moving into my home?" "He's not a stranger," Lindsay said. "No," I said quietly. "He's your father. And he's her ex-husband." Lindsay's eyes narrowed. "You don't have to sound jealous." The word scraped something raw inside me. Jealous. That's what she thought this was. As if 14 years of providing, protecting, holding a family together with my bare hands could be reduced to petty envy. I took a step back, my pulse thudding slow and heavy. "Jealous," I repeated. "You think this is about jealousy?" Emily's voice came soft, almost pleading. "He just needs a place to stay, that's all. It's not forever." "It never is," I said. "Until it is." No one spoke. Outside, a dog barked somewhere down the street, and for a second the sound felt like mockery. Lindsay crossed her arms. "You don't have to make this a big deal." I stared at her, really stared. I saw traces of the little girl who used to fall asleep on the couch beside me, clutching a blanket while I carried her to bed. I saw the teenager who cried over her first heartbreak, who called me from college when her car broke down, who once wrote me a Father's Day card that began with, "You're not my real dad, but you've always been there." That card had been pinned to my workshop wall for years. I took it down the day she moved out. And now here she was, standing in my kitchen, telling me that the man who'd vanished from her life for over a decade was coming to take my place. In the house I built, under the roof I bled for. The silence stretched. "Does he know?" I asked finally. Emily frowned. Know what? That he's moving into my home? She hesitated, and that hesitation was the answer. I laughed, but it came out hollow. Of course he doesn't. Because in your mind, it's not mine anymore, is it? It's yours. Yours and Lindsay's. I just happen to live here. Don't do this, she whispered. Don't turn it into a fight. It's already a fight, I said. You just surrendered before I knew it started. Lindsay set her mug down with a soft clink. He'll be here next week. I turned toward her, and for the first time in years, I felt something colder than anger, detachment. That dangerous calm that comes when a man realizes he's no longer part of the equation. Next week, I repeated. And where exactly will he be staying? In the guest room, she said simply. The one I built myself. The one I painted, patched, and furnished. I nodded. Of course. Emily's voice wavered. Please, can we not make this harder than it has to be? Harder for who? I asked. For me, who's being told that the man you left is now my roommate. Or for you, who can't even look at me while you let it happen. She closed her eyes. It's temporary, she said again, as if repeating it could make it true. I looked around the kitchen, the framed family photos on the wall, the small plants I'd kept alive, the dent on the table where Lindsay once dropped her coffee mug and I told her not to worry about it. Every detail of this place carried my fingerprints. Every inch of it was mine. And yet, in that moment, I realized how little it had ever truly belonged to me. Ownership isn't about deeds or documents. It's about recognition. And I had none left. I set the crumpled newspaper down and walked out of the room before I said something I couldn't take back. From the hallway, I heard Lindsay mutter, I don't know why he's making it such a big deal. And Emily's reply, soft, defeated, he'll come around. They were both wrong. In that moment, something in me went quiet. It wasn't rage. Rage is loud, alive. This was silence, the kind that settles deep in the chest and begins to rewrite the way a man breathes. That night, I sat alone in the garage, surrounded by the smell of oil and sawdust. The air was warm, the kind that makes sweat feel like guilt. I looked at the shelves lined with tools, each one a symbol of years spent fixing what others broke. 14 years. 14 years of staying when I could have left. Of being the stable one, the provider, the patient fool who thought effort could outweigh blood. And now the past was walking through my front door with a suitcase and an invitation I hadn't given. I tried to imagine it. Mark sitting at my table, drinking from my cup, sleeping under my roof, the sound of his laughter echoing down the hallway I built. I pictured Lindsay smiling at him the way she used to smile at me. I pictured Emily softening in that old familiar way that used to belong to me. A man can endure a lot, but not that. Still, I said nothing. Not that night. Not the next. I went to work, came home, kept my voice steady. Because sometimes silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's the sound of a man counting down to his exit. That week, I began to notice small things. The way Emily avoided eye contact, the way Lindsay hummed while packing boxes in the guest room, the way the house seemed to tilt slightly every time I walked through it, as if it already knew I was being written out. Each evening, I sat outside on the porch, watching the sun drop behind the horizon, the sky bleeding into copper. I'd tell myself I still had a place here, that I could weather this like every other storm. But deep down, I knew, this wasn't a storm. It was a quiet demolition. And no one demolishes a house with anger. They do it carefully, piece by piece, pretending not to notice what's falling apart. By the time the week ended, I'd stopped asking when Mark would arrive. I didn't need to. The boxes told the story. The guest room smelled of fresh sheets and betrayal. On Friday night, Emily came to bed late. I pretended to be asleep, but I wasn't. She stood there for a moment, looking at me, maybe for guilt, maybe for reassurance. Then she turned off the light and lay down facing away from me. In the dark, I stared at the ceiling, tracing the faint cracks that had started to form near the fan. Cracks I'd meant to fix for months. Funny thing about cracks, they always start small, and they always start in silence. That night, I realized something simple, something final. A man can pay every bill, fix every leak, keep every promise, and still be a guest in his own house. Because in the end, blood speaks louder than loyalty. And love, real or imagined, doesn't build homes. It decides who gets to stay in them. In the days that followed, the house began to shrink. Not physically, but in presence. Every room seemed to echo differently, as if the walls had started listening to someone else's voice. I would walk through the hallway and hear laughter that didn't include me, plans that didn't ask for my opinion. They were waiting for Mark. The guest room glowed at night under a lamp I had bought, the same lamp that once sat beside Lindsay's bed when she was a child. I could still remember her 10-year-old hand gripping my sleeve after a nightmare, whispering, "Don't go." But she did go. And then she came back with his name in her mouth again. I told myself it was just temporary. That I was overreacting. That maybe there was decency left in the world, even for men like me, stepfathers who learned to love someone else's child without expectation of return. But the lie grew harder to hold each day. Mark was due to arrive on a Thursday. I spent that week drowning in memory. 14 years of it. 14 years of trying to build permanence out of borrowed love. I remembered the first time I met Lindsay. She was 10, small for her age, hiding behind Emily's leg. Her eyes were cautious, the kind that had already learned disappointment. When Emily introduced me, Lindsay didn't speak, she just nodded, as if she'd already decided I was temporary. It took months before she started calling me Michael. And years before she'd say Dad, not in every moment, not publicly, but in small, fragile ways that felt like progress. The first time was on a school trip. She'd scraped her knee on a hike, tears streaking dirt down her cheek. I knelt beside her, wiped the blood away, and she said, between sobs, "Thanks, Dad." That single word carried me through a decade of exhaustion. I remembered the nights I stayed up fixing the old Toyota she called Blue. Rain pouring, mosquitoes biting, me lying half under the car with a flashlight in my mouth because she needed to drive to a friend's graduation the next day. She never saw how hard it was. She just woke up to a running engine and thought the world worked that way. I remembered every recital, every forgotten hobby I still paid for. The violin lessons that lasted 6 weeks. The dance classes she abandoned after 2 months. The college application fees, the dorm deposits, the medical bills for wisdom teeth, braces, emergencies. The credit cards maxed out in my name so she could have what her biological father never bothered to give. Mark was a ghost back then. He sent postcards instead of support. Once, he mailed Lindsay a stuffed bear for her 12th birthday. The tag still had a clearance sticker on it. She cried anyway, not because of the gift, but because it meant he'd remembered she existed. I watched her cry and told myself it was okay. That someday, she'd see who stayed and who ran. That staying mattered more than blood. I was wrong. Time doesn't heal distance. It sanctifies it. It turns the man who left into a myth, a mystery too beautiful to compete with. Every year that Mark disappeared, Lindsay filled in the blanks with kindness. She imagined him trying. She gave him credit for lessons he never taught. She forgave him for wounds he never asked forgiveness for. And I kept paying. When she turned 18, I took out a small loan to cover her tuition at the University of Texas in Austin. She wanted to study music then, said she'd found her purpose. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, signing those papers, thinking how proud her father would be if he'd ever cared enough to stay. He didn't. But I did. I always did. She dropped out after her first semester. Said she needed space. I didn't argue. I just co-signed another lease, another promise. That's the thing about stepfathers, we become experts at silent compromise. We give, and we call it love. We endure, and we call it patience. We disappear behind the word provider until that's all we are. Emily used to thank me for it, in small ways. A squeeze on the hand, a tired smile, a quiet "You're doing so much, Michael." But over time, gratitude turned into expectation. My sacrifices became routine. And routine, in this house, meant invisible. When Mark left, Emily told me, "He's gone for good." I believed her. I built our life around that sentence. I took out new insurance, changed emergency contacts, redid our wills. Every form had my name on it. I thought paperwork could erase history. But you can't notarize belonging. By the time Lindsay graduated, eventually, with debt that had my signature stamped all over it, she'd already started rewriting our story. She told people, "My dad helped me through college." She didn't mean me. She meant Mark. The man who sent a congratulatory text from Nevada and didn't even spell her major right. I remember overhearing her on the phone with a friend one night. She was laughing. "Yeah, Dad's kind of coming back into the picture. Mom says he's really changed." Changed. That word again. The same one Emily had used to justify every disappointment. Changed. As if absence were a chrysalis and irresponsibility a caterpillar waiting to become wisdom. The night before he was supposed to arrive, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house, my house, and saw ghosts of every version of myself still lingering in the corners. The man sanding the banister. The man fixing the gutter. The man balancing bills at midnight. Each ghost looked tired. Each ghost still believed he mattered. Emily was asleep upstairs. I stood outside the guest room door. The air smelled faintly of new detergent. Fresh sheets. I could almost hear the sound of Mark's boots on the floor already. I tried to picture the first morning after he moved in, Lindsay pouring him coffee, Emily smiling awkwardly, me pretending this arrangement was civilized. But the image collapsed under its own weight. I wasn't jealous of him. That would have implied I still wanted what he had. What I felt was simpler, colder. I felt erased. When you spend years giving, you start to think that giving makes you visible. But all it really does is train people to look past you, to see only the results, never the cost. I had been a ghost long before Mark decided to return. That realization came slowly, like rust spreading through metal. Lindsay's childhood photos lined the hallway. Her school portraits, her prom, her graduation. Every image told a story of growth, of progress. But there was something missing from all of them, me. I had taken most of those pictures, standing behind the camera, steadying the frame. Always the observer, never the subject. Maybe that was my mistake. I never demanded to be seen. I thought love would speak for me. The night bled into morning. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty mug in front of me, listening to the house breathe. The refrigerator hummed, the ceiling fan clicked, the distant train passed through town like a heartbeat. When Emily came downstairs, she looked surprised to see me awake. "You should try to sleep," she said gently. I nodded. "Can't." She hesitated, brushing her hair behind her ear. "He's driving in today." I smiled faintly. "I know." Her voice softened. "It's not what you think. It's just temporary." I finished for her. "Yeah, I remember." She frowned, as if the repetition insulted her. "I wish you wouldn't make this harder." I looked at her then, really looked. The woman I'd married. The one I'd carried through lean years, hospital bills, endless compromises. And for the first time, I saw the quiet calculation behind her eyes. Not cruelty, survival. She had learned long ago to make peace with betrayal if it kept her from being alone. "I'm not making it harder," I said. "I'm just finally realizing how easy it's been for everyone else." She didn't answer. Just turned away. After she left for work, I sat there for hours, surrounded by the dull hum of a home I no longer recognized. I thought of every mile I'd driven for that family, every roof I'd patched, every bill I'd covered, every promise I'd kept. And I realized that sacrifice only means something when someone remembers it. Lindsay would remember her father coming home. Emily would remember peace returning. And I would remember silence. Because that's all that was left for me here. Mark arrived on a Thursday evening. I remember because the sky looked bruised, deep purple clouds hanging low over the fields, thunder somewhere too far away to threaten but close enough to promise. I was sitting in the living room when I heard the tires on gravel. The sound of an old truck, engine coughing like a smoker. Through the window, I saw him step out. Same loose swagger, same denim jacket, same grin that could sell bad ideas to better people. He looked older, thinner maybe, but not changed. Not really. Lindsay ran out the front door before I could stand. Her voice cut through the heavy air, bright and sharp. "Dad." He laughed, that open, reckless sound of a man who never had to earn affection. She threw her arms around him, and he spun her once, like time had rewound itself to when she was still small and he hadn't yet ruined everything. Emily appeared a moment later, wiping her hands on a dish towel, nervous smile painted on her face. "You made it," she said. Mark nodded, eyes glinting. "Road was long, but I'm here. Here. In my house." I stayed seated, letting the scene unfold through the glass like a play I hadn't auditioned for. When they finally came inside, I stood to meet him. "Mark," I said. "Michael," he replied, extending a hand that felt like a challenge more than a greeting. We shook. His grip was firm, performative. The kind of handshake meant to prove something. Emily started giving him a tour, as if he hadn't already memorized the layout from the years he'd lived here before me. "We fixed the porch last year," she said softly. "Michael did most of the work." Mark glanced at me, smirked. "Looks good. You've kept the place standing." I didn't answer. Some compliments are just veiled reminders. Lindsay led him to the guest room, my guest room, talking about how she'd redecorated it. "Mom and I thought you'd like it simple," she said. "Perfect," he replied. "Feels like home already." That word hit harder than I expected. Home. After dinner, a meal I didn't taste, I excused myself to the garage. The air smelled of rain and engine oil. I stood there, staring at the half-finished shelf I'd been building weeks earlier, hands resting on the cool metal of the workbench. Behind me, through the door, I could hear them laughing. The sound rolled through the house like thunder finding its echo. I thought about the years I'd filled with quiet devotion, the ones he'd left hollow. And now he was back, welcomed as though absence was a virtue and memory a kind of forgiveness. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake listening to footsteps, his, crossing the hallway. The floorboards creaked differently under his weight. Every sound was an intrusion. Every shadow looked like replacement. By morning, the house had changed temperature. Not literally, but in tone. Even the light through the windows felt different, brighter somehow, but cold. At breakfast, Lindsay made him coffee, black, just the way he liked it. She'd remembered. I didn't even know she knew. Emily tried to make conversation, all nervous energy and forced smiles. "It's nice having everyone together again," she said. "Everyone." Mark looked around, nodding approvingly. "You've done well here," he said to me. "You really built something solid." It should have sounded kind. It didn't. It sounded like ownership reclaimed. I swallowed the bitterness and forced a smile. "Glad you think so." He laughed lightly. "Guess I owe you for taking care of my girls." My girls. That phrase slid under my skin and stayed there. I wanted to remind him that I hadn't done it for gratitude, I'd done it because he hadn't. But what was the point? He lived in a world where apologies were currency he never planned to spend. In the days that followed, he settled in easily. Too easily. His things began to migrate, boots by the door, jacket over the chair, toolbox beside mine in the garage. My space became his extension. He borrowed my drill without asking. Took my truck to run errands. Borrowed cash for gas. I told myself not to care, that material things didn't matter. But they did. Because every borrowed item was a piece of me, a slow erosion. Lindsay adored him. She laughed louder now, like someone had turned the volume up on her happiness. She asked his advice on things she used to bring to me, her car, her job search, her rent. I became background noise again. One afternoon, I came home from work to find the garage door open. Mark was inside, using my tools to tinker with his truck. My truck, I realized belatedly, was gone. Lindsay had taken it to visit a friend. He looked up, grinning. "Hope you don't mind. Needed a few things." I said nothing. Just nodded, the way a man nods at a storm he knows he can't stop. That night, over dinner, he told stories about the old days, the road trips, the wild nights, the time he almost bought a boat. Lindsay hung on every word. Emily smiled softly, nostalgic. When he mentioned the night Lindsay was born, I felt like an outsider at my own table. I had been the one to pay for her birth certificate replacement years later, when the original was lost in a move. But in that moment, I was a stranger eating at the mercy of someone else's history. Afterward, I went upstairs. From the hallway, I heard them laughing again, that rich, familial laughter that used to belong to me. I closed the door. The next few weeks blurred together. The house was alive again, but not with me in it. I moved through rooms like a ghost, quiet, unseen, tolerated. Mark started driving my truck regularly. "Just borrowing," he'd say, tossing me the keys a day later with a grin. I noticed the gas tank was always empty. Once, I found fast food wrappers on the floorboard. My tools disappeared one by one. He called me Buddy. "Hey, Buddy, you mind if I use the shed for a bit?" "Sure thing, Buddy." That word burned worse than any insult. Buddy is what men call each other when they want to make ownership sound like charity. Lindsay's tone toward me changed, too. Shorter sentences. Fewer questions. When she spoke of Mark, her eyes softened. When she spoke to me, they hardened. Emily avoided confrontation. That was her gift. Silence dressed as peace. I'd find her on the porch sometimes, watching the sunset with that faraway look, like she'd already accepted the new order. One night, I overheard her on the phone. She didn't know I was standing in the hallway. "Yes," she whispered. "He's doing better now. He's been helping around the house. I think this is good for all of us." All of us. Something inside me began to close. Not in anger, but in understanding. A man can live his whole life trying to be enough and still find himself replaced by memory. You can build a foundation, pour your time into it, fill it with love, and one day wake to find it occupied by ghosts who never built a single thing. That's when the decision began to form. Quiet, deliberate, inevitable. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I just started making arrangements. I met with the bank on a Monday. Explained that I wanted to transfer the mortgage into another name. They said it was unusual. I said so was my situation. By Wednesday, the paperwork was ready. All I needed was a signature, his. That evening, I found him in the garage again, humming while he sanded a piece of wood that didn't need sanding. "Mark," I said. "Got a minute?" He wiped his hands on a rag. "Sure thing, Buddy." I handed him the papers. "Thought you might want to make it official. You're part of this place now." He looked confused, then grinned. "You serious?" "Dead serious," I said. He signed without reading. Men like him never do. When he left the room, I stared at the paper for a long time. His name, bold and careless, beside mine. One fading, one newly written. That night, I packed. Not dramatically, just the essentials. Clothes, tools, a few photos of my own daughters. Emily was asleep when I walked past the bedroom. I paused at the door. The moonlight spilled across her face, soft and familiar. I thought about waking her, saying goodbye. But goodbyes are for people who still believe they'll be missed. I left quietly. The next morning, before dawn, I set the signed documents on the kitchen counter beside a note that said only one sentence. "The house is yours now. So is the silence." Then I drove west. The sun rose behind me, pale and distant, turning the road ahead to gold. Somewhere past El Paso, I stopped for gas, stretched my legs, and realized I wasn't angry anymore. Just empty, The clean kind of empty that comes after a storm has taken everything worth saving. By the time I reached Arizona, I felt lighter than I had in years. I rented a small apartment above a repair shop in Phoenix. By day, I fixed cars for men who still believed their engines could be rebuilt. By night, I sat on the porch and watched the desert swallow the sun. No laughter, no apologies, no reminders of what I'd lost. Just quiet. Sometimes I still think of that house in Texas. The porch, the smell of fresh coffee, the sound of Lindsay's laughter before it turned into something sharper. I wonder if they ever noticed how quickly the mortgage notices started coming. How the bills stacked up without my name on them. Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. Either way, it's no longer my concern. Because in the end, the truest act of love I ever gave them was leaving. And I gave it freely. Months passed before I heard from them again. The first message came in early autumn, when the desert mornings began to cool and the light turned softer, like forgiveness that didn't belong to anyone. It was Lindsay. The text arrived without greeting, just a sentence. "We're having trouble with the bills. Can you call Mom?" I stared at the screen until it went dark. Then I turned it over and went back to work. The shop smelled of oil and rust, the kind of smell that gets under your nails and never leaves. I'd started over as a mechanic, renting a small space behind a gas station on the edge of Phoenix. The sign outside read Davis Auto Repair, though the name didn't mean much to anyone but me. Most days, I worked alone. Sometimes a drifter would come by, needing a fix for a truck older than he was. Sometimes I'd help for free, just to remind myself that generosity could exist without being devoured. In the evenings, I'd sit on the balcony of my apartment with a cup of black coffee, watching the red dust rise as the sun sank. I'd count the hours not by clocks but by the color of the light. There was peace in that, the peace of a man who no longer owed anyone a version of himself he couldn't maintain. The second message came a few weeks later. This time from Emily. "We need to talk. It's important." I didn't respond right away. The past has a way of disguising itself as urgency. When I finally called, her voice cracked halfway between pride and desperation. "Michael," she said. "It's bad. The mortgage." I cut her off gently. "It's not my mortgage anymore." "I know," she said quickly. "But Mark, he left. Again." I didn't answer. The silence filled the line, thick as smoke. "He said he'd get a job. He said he'd help. But he hasn't. The payments are months behind. I'm working extra shifts, but it's not enough. Lindsay's trying, but she can't keep up." I took a slow breath. "I warned you." Her voice trembled. "You don't have to say it like that." "Like what?" "Like you're glad." I wasn't glad. But I wasn't sorry, either. There's a difference. "Emily," I said finally, "you made your choice. You let him back in. You decided who belonged in that house. Now you're living with the truth of it." "Don't do this," she whispered. "Please. I know you're hurt, but we're drowning." "You're not drowning," I said. "You're learning how deep the water really was." We both went quiet. After a long pause, she said softly, "Lindsay misses you." "No," I replied. "She misses the version of me that paid the bills." Then I hung up. That night, I couldn't sleep. The desert wind howled through the alleyways, rattling the tin signs outside. I sat by the window, staring at the city lights flickering like faint confessions. Part of me wanted to drive back. Not to help, but to see. To stand outside that house one last time, just to witness what remained. But I didn't. Some distances shouldn't be crossed twice. 2 months later, I got a letter. Real paper, folded neatly in an envelope with my name written in her handwriting. "Lindsay's." "Michael," it began. "I know you don't want to hear from me, but I need you to understand. I was wrong about him. About everything. He's gone again. He took Mom's car, sold some of your tools, said he'd be back, but we haven't heard from him in weeks. Mom's working non-stop. I tried to cover the payments, but the bank sent a notice. We're losing the house. I'm sorry. I didn't know it could all fall apart this fast. There was more, apologies, explanations, please. But the line that stayed with me was at the bottom. You were the only real father I ever had. I see that now. I hope you're okay. I folded the letter carefully, placed it in a drawer, and left it there. Not out of cruelty, but because I didn't need her guilt. I'd already buried mine. Winter came. The desert doesn't freeze the way Texas does, but the nights turn sharp enough to make you remember you're alive. Business at the shop slowed, but I didn't mind. I spent the extra hours fixing old radios, reading, or driving aimlessly along roads that stretched too far to finish. One morning, as I was tuning a carburetor, an unfamiliar number called. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Michael. It was Lindsay. Her voice was small, stripped of the certainty it used to carry. They took the house, she said. The bank. Mom's staying with a friend. I don't know what to do. I didn't say anything for a long time. Are you there? She asked. I'm here, I said quietly. Could you maybe talk to her? She's not doing well. I rubbed my forehead. The sound of her voice took me back, to dinners, to arguments, to the small girl asking for help with her math homework. Lindsay, I said slowly, you have to stop looking backward. That house was built on denial. You can't live in it anymore, even if the bank gave it back. She started crying then, softly, like someone trying not to wake a memory. I didn't know he'd do it again, she said. You did, I said. You just hoped he wouldn't. She didn't argue. Only silence answered me. Before she hung up, she whispered, I wish you'd come back. I almost said I wished it too. But that would have been a lie. After the call, I sat in the workshop for a long time, listening to the ticking of the clock, the faint hum of the fluorescent light. Everything around me was small, simple, manageable, the opposite of what I'd left behind. I realized then that peace doesn't come from forgiveness. It comes from the absence of expectation. Weeks passed. The calls stopped. The letters stopped. Even the memories started to quiet down, like dust settling after a long storm. Sometimes I wondered what became of them. Maybe Lindsay found her footing. Maybe Emily remarried. Maybe Mark resurfaced somewhere, spinning new lies for a different family. The world always has room for men like him. But I never went back. I kept building my new life, one day at a time. My workshop grew busier. Word spread that I was honest, that I charged fair prices, that I didn't cut corners. People trusted me, a strange, humbling thing after years of being unseen. In the evenings, I'd sit by the radio, listening to the static between stations. It reminded me of the noise that used to fill my old house. Voices overlapping, laughter curdled with tension. Now there was just quiet, pure and unbroken. One Sunday, nearly a year after I'd left, I received a small package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photograph, the house in Texas, boarded windows, overgrown lawn. On the back, in faint handwriting, you were right. I didn't need to know who sent it. I set it on the shelf above my workbench, beside an old wrench and a half-burned candle. Not as a trophy, as proof. Proof that some debts collect themselves without interest. That night, as the desert wind rattled the windows, I thought about everything I'd lost, the years, the love, the illusion. And I realized I hadn't lost anything worth keeping. Because sometimes leaving isn't running away. Sometimes it's the only honest thing left to do. I poured myself a drink, stepped outside, and watched the sky fade into darkness. The stars above Arizona are sharper than anywhere else, like tiny knives against velvet. I traced them slowly, naming none, claiming none. For the first time in years, I felt a strange kind of gratitude. Not for what I'd endured, but for what I'd escaped. In that quiet, I thought of Lindsay again. I hoped she'd learned what I had, that love without respect isn't love at all. It's dependency in disguise. And that sometimes the only way to teach it is to walk away. I finished my drink and whispered to the night, I forgive you all, but I won't return. The wind carried the words off the balcony, scattering them into the desert. Tomorrow, I'd open the shop again. Fix someone else's engine. Eat lunch in silence. Live simply. And if someone asked about my family, I'd tell them the truth, that I once had a home full of people who couldn't see me, and that leaving it was the best thing I ever built. Was I wrong? Maybe. But tell me, what would you have done, if betrayal wore your last name and still asked you to pay the mortgage?